Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to spend some time in the first hour looking at your finances and helping you have a biblical perspective on them, and especially in the time of turmoil that we are facing right now. Very significant to make sure that we make wise decisions. We bring back to the microphone in studio somebody's been with us many times before. As a matter of fact, if you'd like to watch the program, you can go to our website, pointofview.net, and go to the Livecast, or of course you can sit back and listen as we talk with Jerry Tuma. He is the founder and president of Cornerstone Financial Services, which is a state-registered investment advisory firm in Dallas, Texas. Might mention that even though we will be talking about finances, material on this program is intended really for general information only and should not be taken as specific investment, tax, or legal advice. We have in the past made available many of his books, including From Boom to Bust. And Jerry, just great to have you back in studio.
Awesome to be back with you, Kerby.
I just mentioned a minute ago, let's talk about this. Later in this week, we'll be talking about the conflict in the Middle East. All sorts of questions and tensions there. In one of your reports, you talk about Iraq. And, of course, you could certainly add to that Israel. And then, of course, we have the immigration challenge right now, this invasion almost at the southern border. And so when you have all of these things happening at once, I think it's really careful and really important for people to be careful to make wise decisions, not to jump into a particular investment strategy simply because of all the turmoil that's taking place around us.
You bet, Kerby. And, you know, on the one hand, we're seeing it's kind of a tale of two cities, the best of times and the worst of times at the same time. On the one hand, we've got a stock market that's hitting all-time record highs and seems to be resetting that record every few days.
Yes.
On the other hand, the economy, even though we've seen some improvement in jobs, this is without question. If you look at the history of the U.S. economy, this is without question the slowest economic recovery on record.
Yes.
Bar none. And that's not even debatable. I mean, if you look at the gross domestic product, how much it's grown, the first half of this year was a negative, almost -3. You know, we're going to have to get back 3 this quarter to get to 0. The bottom line is this is the slowest recovery ever. That includes the Great Depression. Now, the Great Depression was much worse in terms of its magnitude, its depth. The stock market went down 90% in the 30s, but the bounce off the bottom from 33 on was a big bounce. You know, the economy's growing like 9% a year. Most people don't know that because it's so miserable, 25% unemployment rate. So the 2008 market was nowhere near as severe as that. It got scary. It looked like for a while it might be going there, but they began to do some printing press and propped up the system and revamped things. And so they got the economy, quote unquote, turned around, at least stopped bleeding. And they got the stock market pumped back up to an all-time record. Real estate's improved. So there are a lot of good things that have happened since 2008. But if you look at the sector of, the economy, again, there's a big disconnect between the economy and the market.
Right.
So right now, the economy, even though we have had some reasonably good job numbers recently, it's taken forever to get there. If you look at how long this slump has been, which, by the way, is typical of what we call deleveraging cycles. Deleveraging cycles obviously are where we had a huge bubble of debt in credit in the housing market. Wall Street sliced and diced that into all sorts of tranches and leveraged it 30-to-1, and we had a credit crisis as a result of the housing market bubble. And so the odds are, basically, if you look at the history of these things, they usually take literally about 10 years to fully digest and get all that bad credit out of the system. So I think by 2017 or 18, a lot of that will be accomplished. But I'm concerned in the short run. That's why we have a new newsletter called Macro Risk that people can subscribe to. It's no charge. It's a monthly newsletter that comes out, and I typically publish about once a month, or I'll get someone else to sub for me if I'm traveling. But the bottom line is there are a lot of risks that I see out there right now. So on the one hand, we have an economy that is growing. It's still not growing at a high rate, but they are getting some jobs. Like I said, the housing market's made some improvements. It's put in a bottom without question. But the stock market has just been on joy juice for a long time. And one of the things I see, you're looking at one of the other newsletters I wrote called Euphoria Marks the Top, is that when you get to the top of the cycle, remember, obviously everything has an end. You know, bull markets last until they don't. And at some point, the bear takes over again.
Yes.
And I'm not going to say how severe the next bear market's going to be because we don't know. But we do know that bear markets follow bull markets. You know, crashes follow bubbles that go up just as surely as winter follows summer. So the issue is there will be another down leg. And what I'm concerned about right now, Kerby, it doesn't look like we've hit the top yet, as far as I can tell. We have one of our signals that's the best I've seen at marking tops. It's kind of flashing red.
Right.
One that's still green, so it's not quite yet. But at the same time, we're seeing record amount of speculation. We have people that are doing what we call pre-revenue initial public offerings, or IPOs. Pre-revenue means no sales.
Haven't made any money.
Okay,
haven't
so you're
sold anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're going to take a company public. And, you know,
that has no track record.
Biotech's been a big area. Not only no track record, the company's essentially barely even in existence.
Haven't we seen this before?
Yeah, it reminds me of 2000. For those of you old enough to remember that, we did that. So I've got this great idea for you, Kerby. Here's what I'm going to do, because biotech's been one of the hot sectors. I've invented this time machine, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everybody that's getting old and take them back 20 years in time, kind of like Back to the Future, and then when I bring them back forward, they'll be young again. Now, that should be worth at least $1 billion, don't you think, on the market? Well, of course not. What I'm saying, I'm exaggerating, but the point is these biotech companies and these pre-revenue IPOs have never sold one dime's worth of anything. It's a concept. It's something where it's like, okay, this looks like a good idea on paper, and then Wall Street takes them and sells it to the general public out there, and they're worth $100 million. This is insanity. It's not Madoff, because Madoff didn't tell us he was going to rip your money off. But when you get a pre-revenue IPO, you got to say, hey, guys, this is getting a little bit what we call frothy. This is getting insane. Margin debt is hitting another new high. It looks like it may have topped out. So what I'm saying is, and of course, Kerby, you know, we can't give blanket recommendations because you may have one person's 25 years old putting money in their 401k. You may have someone else who sold a business and they're 65 and this is all the money they've got to live on. But what I am saying is I think that we need to be preparing. It doesn't look, as best I can tell, that we have the top of the market cycle in. And we've not been perfect at Cornerstone because I didn't see the 2008 one coming, frankly, timing-wise. But we were able to warn people. Matter of fact, when I did this show back in 1987, 1990, 98, and in 2000, we were able to warn people ahead of time before those bear markets. So the issue is, I don't think we've seen the top yet, but I do think we need to be watching real close. Maybe there's another 10%, maybe a few months. With the elections coming in November, you know, they're going to want everything to still look nice through November, probably into the first quarter of next year. But I'll be shocked if by this time next year we're not sitting here in a completely different world wondering what happened and where'd this trapdoor come from that I just fell in. So that's the point is everybody's got a different situation. They've got to decide on their own what to do. But this is a newsletter we'd like them to get so they can make some wise decisions.
Let me just mention that we have some resources for you today, as we always do. First of all, the Cornerstone report is free, and we've put up a sample of the one that we mentioned just in passing, Euphoria Marks the Top. It's an older one, but then there's the new one, Macro Risk, which, again, you can go to either the bottom of the link on the article, or we also have a web link to Cornerstone Financial so that you can receive those and get some information. But when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of being careful. You've used the illustration before of James Stockdale, who was a POW, and what he developed in that POW camp is a philosophy that we may want to apply when we talk about these issues. So we'll continue our conversation with Jerry Tuma, and of course we're going to open up the phones to give you a chance to ask some questions about finances. All that coming up right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
In a recent editorial, Merrill Matthews reminds us that America has now passed the entitlements tipping point. As you might have guessed, Obamacare is what has pushed the United States over the tipping point. Nearly 7 million Americans who have signed up for Obamacare receive taxpayer-provided subsidies, and another 3 million have signed up for Medicaid. This brings the total to 161 million Americans who now are getting government subsidies of some kind. In the past, there have been politicians complaining that we have too many people in the wagon and too few people pulling the wagon. You even had a presidential candidate lament that too many Americans are takers. Let's reject some of these stereotypes. Many of the people receiving government aid deserve it. For example, 42 million seniors are receiving Social Security and Medicare. Merrill Matthews says they aren't getting something for free. They faithfully paid into the system for decades with the expectation that they would be getting it back at retirement. Of course, we can add to this those who receive benefits because of their service in the military or other parts of the government. My point in raising this issue is not to begrudge those who deserve to receive benefits, but to look at the larger issue. More than half of households receive benefits from the government. When a majority receive benefits from government, it will be even harder, perhaps impossible, to reduce spending and balance the budget. Benjamin Franklin warned, when the people find that they can vote themselves money, that will herald the end of the republic. Let's hope not. Certainly some people can look past their needs to the needs of the country. I've had people call into my radio program who receive Social Security or other government payments who have said they'd be willing to sacrifice something if they could help future Americans. But I suspect they are few in number. It will be even harder to control government spending when a majority of Americans depend on government spending. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We just have in studio with us today Jerry Tuma, a certified financial planner, president, and founder of Cornerstone Financial Services. Let me just mention that we are making available to you, and he's been very gracious to make available to you, these Cornerstone reports for free, and I've got my collection of them. We have the first page of one of them from April. Euphoria marks the top, although I know that you've revised it a little bit. We'll talk about that in a minute. You just mentioned the new one, Macro Risk. So there's quite a number that he would be glad to send to you. And we at one point kind of forced you to try to do it weekly. Now it's kind of monthly, but still some great information. I want to come back to some of those points, but I made one a minute ago about being careful. And you've used this illustration before, that when James Stockdale, who was one of many of the POWs in the Hanoi Hilton, he began to realize that he had to take seriously his circumstances, do a rigorous evaluation, and some POWs died just because they became too depressed. And I think you've learned that that Stockdale principle, which worked in the POW camp, is a good principle to use when you're looking at your own finances.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite business books of all times, New York Times runaway bestseller, Good to Great, talks about how the companies that perform best in the stock market from about 1950 to 2000 all use the Stockdale paradox as well. And basically what it says is that you have to be brutally honest. That means you don't sugarcoat it. You don't do what we call confirmation bias and only subconsciously screen out anything that doesn't fit what you want to hear. But you have to be brutally honest in your assessment of your current reality, which is what you have to do with the market and the economy, but at the same time have unwavering faith that you prevail in the end. And Admiral Stockdale, highest-ranking prisoner of war of Vietnam, found that that's what you had to do to make it through that kind of environment. Now, we're not in a prisoner of war camp here, but America is facing challenges, and the challenges, in my view, are not over, not by a long shot. So the issue here is it's really, really important to be realistic about what's going on. Like I said earlier, okay, you don't want to discount, you don't want to have the glass half empty all the time or the glass half full time all the time either, because you're going to be, if you're an optimist, I don't remember who said it now, but he said basically, the optimist expects the weather to change. The pessimist, is gloomy about the wind, and the realist just readjusts the sails. So you have to readjust your sails from time to time. So the issue is, I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad. What I am saying is, reality is, this has been the slowest economic recovery in U.S. history.
Right. At
the same time, the stock market has had
crazy.
Huge numbers.
Just going nuts.
The Fed, a lot of that came from the Fed. Let's call it the printing press, also known as quantitative easing, where the Fed literally electronically buys mortgage bonds or government bonds or whatever they buy with money they create out of thin air. They're pumping the system back up. What happened? We had a massive attack. We had a white shark, a great white shark, who attacked our life raft in 2008 and took a big old bite out of one end of it.
Right.
And so we've had the Fed on the one end of it pumping it up with a bicycle pump, so they've kept us above water. Right. But there's still been air leaking out the other end. So the issue is we've not reinflated the economy completely. We've had an improvement, but it's nothing like the recoveries that we've seen in any of the previous cycles that we've been through, either while those that are living and those that are deceased. We haven't had that kind of recovery. So the issue is, I made comment back in 2009, you're not going to get Humpty Dumpty back together again. Mm-hmm. Well, Humpty Dumpty is sitting on the wall, but he's got duct tape all over him. He's pieced together a whole bunch of duct tape. It's still not the same. So the point is, having a reality understanding of what are the challenges we face, number one, and then that will help you know what to do about them. And number two, what are the good things? So you have to look at the good and the bad, which is one of the things that we try to do in this special report. So on the one hand, you're seeing the stock market hitting all-time highs. I mentioned in the first half, we have kind of two things that we look at that, now again, past performance is no guarantee, but we, by God's grace, have been able to pre-warn people about 4 of the last 5 bear markets. We missed 2008, but 4 of the previous, we also, 87, 2000, et cetera, we warned about the bear market before it came. So we're not perfect, but we have a good track record overall at identifying the major turning points, the major tops in the market cycle. And right now, the 2 that I've seen in 34 years, and there may be other ones out there that I don't know about or other people have found better indicators, but the 2 that I've found that tend to give you the best warning about the next bear market, one of them is flashing red, the other one is still a green light. So what does that tell me? That tells me the odds are the next cycle is probably not down yet. It may be maybe in January, whatever. It's too early to tell. But margin debt, which is how much people are borrowing to put in the stock market, is flashing red. It has a track record that goes back to the 50s at pre-identifying the tops. The other one we use is called the advanced decline line. I know that sounds like technical jargon to a lot of people. You take the number of stocks going up, divide those by the stocks that are going down. If the trend is still positive, the trend is your friend. So the issue is we have mixed signals right now. Bottom line, though, is risk is getting to be extreme with leverage, with speculation, which we talked about, like the pre-earnings IPOs, record junk bond issuance, all sorts of speculations going on. So contrary to the way human emotions are, when the market is high, emotions tell you risk is low. But remember, that's exactly the opposite. Yeah. Whereas when the market is high, you're buying high, that's when your risk is the highest, even though emotionally it feels low.
That's why you call it euphoria. People are all excited about that. The market's going up, so everybody's buying into it. Exactly. And you're saying, I don't know that I want to be buying into it.
And going into debt and going into speculative stuff.
It's about ready to go down, yeah.
Exactly. When the market's low, when the Dow was at 6,400 in March of 2009, no one would touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Nobody buy it, but then you're buying low, selling high, which is what you want to do.
Yeah, where have you heard that before? So the old
buy low, buy high and sell low. So that's that's the worst.
Buy low, sell high works. Buy high, sell low doesn't.
Let me just mention for a minute. I know that this is radio, but one of the things we try to do is give people visual images. And if you go to our website right now, if you have a computer or can later, just click on that particular section that we have there called articles. And that first article says Euphoria marks the top. And as you go there, hit that first article, you see the graph. And I would hope people would watch that graph. If they can't do it right now, go and look later. Of course, it's part of the whole report, which they just need to say that they would like to get it. And you can follow the links there to do so. But what you find is it's like two parallel lines. You know, I do HO trains, and it looks like an HO train track, you know. And you have, first of all, the margin debt, and as it goes up, then you see also, of course, the stock market. As you see it goes down, the stock market goes down, and it's almost a perfect match.
Right.
Well, if indeed, going all the way back to like the 50s, you've been able to show that each time when that margin debt goes down, the stock market goes down, it tells me that right now, just one of the application points might not be the best time to invest in stocks because they may be going down.
You just have to be very cautious and not go get greedy at this point, because the chart you're showing, you know, the euphoria top is a couple of months back.
Now you have a better one.
Now we have a better, because it had not, the margin debt had not peaked out then. It looks like it's peaked now.
But
and
now
usually
it's going down.
You,
and that's the red light, right?
That's the flashing red light. Yeah.
Yes.
Usually you get 3-6 months, maybe 6 months worth of lead time before the market itself begins to go down, because you're taking fuel out. In other words, if people are borrowing money, if you took $100,000, put it in your brokerage account, and borrowed another $100,000 to invest, you're investing $200,000. That's margin buying in stocks. That means you doubled your purchasing power, if you will. You bought twice as much stock as you had money, which works great when it's going up. But when it starts going down, you're losing money twice as fast, and so your $100,000 is just going to shrivel really quickly. So that's why bear markets, the market goes down a lot faster than it goes up. The old saying is the market climbs a wall of worry, but when the bear market starts, it goes down severely. So you can lose in 12 or 18 months 5 years worth of gains.
It's just amazing.
That's the whole way it works. Plus, fear is a stronger emotion than greed.
Mm-hmm.
And the behavioral economics guys have said that it's about 2.5 times more powerful. So the issue here is, I'm not saying it's an imminent top. I'm not saying we've hit the trigger point yet, but I see enough stuff out there. I think the Middle East could be something that could potentially create a tipping point.
Not to mention this immigration invasion
all
on our
sorts
border.
of things out there that are right now saying, hey, I'm concerned about where this thing's headed. But it's, in my view, certainly not time. This is my opinion only. I don't think it's time to be speculative, greedy, or getting overly leveraged in the market right now, because it certainly is not low.
Well, and again, we're going to take a break, and as we've mentioned before, we're not giving specific advice, but it certainly causes me to look at that and say, this is probably not a time when somebody says, oh, there's a great stock that you need to invest in, or, you know, you really just need to be all in the stock market because look at how the stock market's going up. No, actually, it's a good time to be reevaluating that.
Unless you're really good at getting out quickly and when the thing turns.
Well, that's something I did not anticipate till we talked today, so we'll certainly talk about that. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we will take some of your phone calls. Perhaps some of you are saying, well, okay, if I'm not going to invest in the stock market, what would you suggest? You know, we've talked about housing, and we've talked about land, we've talked about gold and silver, all sorts of things. So perhaps you have some questions about that. We certainly have Jerry Tuma here to give you some general ideas. Obviously, cannot give specific advice, but also want to get to one other issue that you and I have talked about, and that is the government. And my commentary today, which just happened to show up the same day that you were here, is found that we've now reached a tipping point. When you add in the 7 million people that have actually signed up for Obamacare, you add in the 3, and it's probably now almost 4 million people have signed up for Medicaid. Jerry, it's now fair to say that we have more people receiving government benefits than ever before. We have a majority. Now, grant you, some of those people paid into Social Security. They deserve it back. They've served in the government, served in the military, deserve it back. So I don't like this idea of too few people pulling the wagon and too many in the wagon, because some people deserve that. But what do you do, and how do you control the size and scope of government if so many people are dependent upon more government spending? So we'll talk about that right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, we have Jerry Tuma in studio with us, certified financial planner, president, and founder of Cornerstone Financial Services. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Perhaps you have specific questions. Those probably could be answered off air, but if you'd like to get some general predictions or thoughts or things to think about as you evaluate your financial resources. God has placed in your hands some very important financial resources, and you need to be a good steward of those. We'll certainly try to answer those questions. 1-800-351-1212. Let's go out to Texas first. KJRT. Ron, thank you for calling today.
Yes, thank you, Kerby, for taking my call. Yes, Jerry, I had a question concerning the FATCA Act that was implemented in July the 1st, and if you were aware, I'm sure you are aware of it, but how it would affect us as an investors, whether overseas accounts or just any of our money in general, and if there was a devaluation of the dollar, just what effect that would have.
Sure. Let me jump in real quickly because some people are saying, okay, what are you talking about here? It's the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. That's what is FATCA, F-A-T-C-A, Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. And in July, it went into effect. There have been some that have said it might have some effect on the dollar, although my argument has always been if you want to talk about who's having a definite effect on the dollar, it's called the Federal Reserve. But, okay, well, any thoughts?
I don't think it's going to be a huge issue with the dollar. And one of the things you got to be careful, Ron, and the rest of the listeners out there, is know your sources. Know where you're getting information from. And I'm not saying, I don't know what your source is, but here's what I would say. The dollar in no way, shape, or form is going away as a reserve currency of the world anytime soon. Now, the Chinese are diversifying a little bit, that's prudent, but they're not bailing on the dollar. What most people tend to talk about with the dollars are talking about a currency collapse.
Yes.
Now, could that happen? Conceivably, it could, but I think the timing is a long ways off if it does. The issue here is really the bigger issue right now. If you're looking at the currency markets today, the bigger issue is really the euro. The reason that I think that's a bigger issue, and by the way, if we have a recession, if we have a trigger to this next bear market, whatever the trigger is going to be, my very strong opinion, although I can't guarantee this obviously, is I think whatever happens will be some kind of a shock from outside the United States, most likely. There's a very good chance you could see a $30 or $40 a barrel spike in oil if Iraq gets out of control, because our best analysts at Bank Credit Analysts do not believe that the Saudis have the capability anymore of replacing Iraq's oil on the world oil market. If you see oil at $150 a barrel, Europe and the rest of the world is probably going back into recession.
Right.
Europe is really the weak point of the world right now, the Achilles heel, if you will. Their banking system has about $1 trillion of bad debt on the books. Now, they've recapitalized their banks somewhat, raised money in the market and so forth, trying to sell off some of their assets. But the problem is they really did not recapitalize their banks. They didn't make them healthy the way we did in our country. And as a result, they've been you talk about a slow recovery. Theirs has been almost non-existent, and they nearly had another crisis in 2011, or did have a crisis that so far is holding together. But the issue is, instead, they've been what we call repatriating assets.
Right.
What does that mean? Well, they own real estate in the United States. They sell their real estate in the United States to come back and prop up their banks in Europe. Spanish been doing this, Italians, and so forth. The problem with that is when you sell U.S.-based assets that are priced in dollars and bring the money back to Europe, which is in euros, it creates additional demand for the euro, which pushes the price of the euro up,
right,
which makes it harder for their economies to recover because Europe is an export-based economy. They export a lot more products. The best analysts I've seen, Standard & Poor's, said that the emerging markets, which is where another potential trigger point could be, essentially a third of all sales from the European countries goes to these big emerging markets like China, Indonesia, Brazil. So the issue here is the euro is actually strengthening, which is not a good idea over there because they're trying to struggle to recover. If you're exporting and selling products to China, that means the price of your product is going higher,
right,
which impinges your market share, makes it harder for you to sell your product. You sell less of your product, or you have to cut your price to maintain competitiveness. So The issue is the rest of the world is a lot more messed up than we are, Kerby.
As hard as that is to believe. Yes.
China's been the primary source of growth, and the rest of the emerging markets for the last 5 years since the bottom in 2009.
You've talked about how much concrete they're using.
Yes, the Chinese, the latest statistic I have is that the Chinese have used as much concrete in the last 3 years as the United States did in the last 100 years.
Yes.
Which is an amazing
statistic. They're building roads and dams and houses and buildings.
But you've also had an enormous credit bubble, which we talk about in our newsletter, Macro Risks. The bank credit analyst, emerging markets analyst, said that it's the largest bubble in credit, I will quote, in the history of human beings, unquote.
Wow.
So here we are, we had all these problems with the subprime loans and the housing bubble. We had the dot-com bubble. Now we're having an emerging market debt bubble in their banking system over there, not their governments, but their private sector banking and real estate and all that stuff. So I just think there's a whole lot of different things that could come home to roost in the next 2 years that are going to make some more challenging times. But in the long run, in the short run, I see no real negative impact on the dollar. I don't see it crashing. I don't think this FACTA bill is going to have that big of a difference to the dollar. The bigger issue will be this: most likely when we do have the next crash or the next bear market, historically, investors still flock to the U.S. dollar as a safe haven. Right. I think that will cause the dollar to strengthen if and when that happens.
Let me just mention again that Macro Risks particular newsletter is just out. So again, we have not posted that, but if you go to Cornerstone Financial Reports, you can get the Cornerstone Report, the full one that we have posted, as well as this new one that we're just talking about today. And I would encourage you to do so. It's free and gives you a little more history about that. Well, we talked about the dollar a minute ago with Ron. Pete wants to pick up on my comment. If I'm concerned about the devaluation of the dollar, I think that comes from the Federal Reserve. So, Pete, I think that's your question. Pete's calling in from Kentucky. What would you like to say?
I'd like to ask him, with the Federal Reserve's stated policy of devaluing the dollar, has he heard about that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, how are you defining that and their policy?
Well, if you look at the reports out of the IMF stated that all Asian currencies are undervalued between 40 and 50%. It's obvious that statement is the corollary, is that the U.S. dollar is overvalued. Okay,
I got you. Yeah, the main thing there, Pete, is this. You can make the case whether it's over or undervalued on a purchasing power parity type basis or whatever you want. The real issue is that the emerging markets are where primarily most of the world growth is coming from right now, but they're having challenges with a debt bubble in their private credit sector. So the U.S. dollar, to me, is a medium of exchange. I'm not that worried about whether it's too high or too low. The issue, unless you're a currency trader, I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact on you. Now, it can kind of supercharge your performance if you're investing overseas and the dollar does go down. I think over the long run, I'll put it this way, I do think that the Fed and I think others would prefer to have a slightly weaker dollar. They don't want a dollar crash. That's disruptive. So if you have a crash in the dollar, they will do everything they can to protect the dollar because they know that we get kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card economically because we are the reserve currency of the world. And that gives us privileges that no one else gets. You talk about the American Express privileges. We get those incredible privileges from being that reserve currency. It gives us the ability to print too much money. It gives us the ability to spend too much money for the federal government. But I don't see a crash in the dollar in the near term in the next few years. Down the road, the dollar could lose its status as reserve currency over time, but that's going to take years and years because there's not an alternative to it right now. And even with all of our economic problems, we're in better shape than Europe is financially. We're in better shape than Japan. There is no other alternative to the dollar that's available to be the medium of exchange for the whole world. So in the long run, yes, I see the Fed may want a slightly weaker dollar because it helps American companies because, again, our exports that we export out to the rest of the world are more competitive. They're cheaper. We can compete on the world market for our multinational corporations, but they certainly do not want to see a crash in the dollar. That would be extremely disruptive, and that would cause all sorts of havoc and panic, and I simply don't think it's likely in the near term.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jerry Tuma. Haven't gotten to that point about tipping point that was my commentary today, and we'll talk about that briefly, because in the midst of all this turmoil taking place outside of the United States, even at our border, there's another issue, and that is the continued growth of government, and whether or not that spells some kind of concern later on. If we can never control spending, if our national debt continues to increase year in and year out, almost no matter who the president is, no matter who Congress is, and if indeed we have reached a tipping point where 52% of American households receive benefits, it's going to be even more difficult to control spending. And that is another real significant flashing red light out there to talk about. So we're going to take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Jerry Tuma. And if you'd like to join us, we still have room for you on the line, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
A couple more issues on the table. One I've mentioned just a minute ago, Jerry, and that is, in my commentary today, we talk about the fact, and this was well documented by Dr. Merrill Matthews, but you can run the numbers yourself. About 161 million Americans right now are getting some government subsidies. Some of those certainly are valuable and necessity. Certainly people paying into Social Security and Medicare deserve that. People that served in government service or in the military deserve that. But the point is, when you add all that up and you add food stamps and you add all sorts of disability and you add in all the new people that have been added to Obamacare and then all the people that signed up for Medicaid, you have 52% of Americans in households right now that are receiving some benefit from the government. Well, it's tough to constrain the size and scope of government if a majority of Americans are dependent upon government spending. And that is another one of those flashing lights. I don't know if I want to make it a flashing yellow light or red light, but that could eventually affect what you just talked about a minute ago, the reserve currency. If indeed the countries around the world say you just simply cannot control your government, you cannot control spending, you continue to go into debt, you look more like Greece than you look like Germany, to use the Europe example. I think they're going to give up on us someday. What are your thoughts?
I think that this is a very real challenge and a very real something. You know, we mentioned that I don't think that the reserve status of the government of the dollar is at risk in the short term, but I think in the long term it very well is, and it's this issue right here. When you do have 52% of the people getting a check from the government of some form, then you're incentivized the wrong direction in terms of how you vote, how you handle the economy. There's a certain percentage of that that's not productive. You know, Paul said, if a man won't work, you won't eat. And we certainly have to support widows and children. There's a lot of good things that government does. So I'm not an anarchist. I'm not an, extremist in terms of conservative government. But the issue here really simply is, right now, it's sort of a runaway freight train with no wheels on it. If you look at the 76 million baby boomers that are coming into Social Security, Medicare, 10,000 people per day.
Yes.
And we've only seen the very early edge of that's moved into Social Security, Medicare. I have big concerns that probably, I'm guessing it may not even happen this decade, possibly late in the decade, but more probable in the 2020s, where you do have an issue with potentially losing our status as reserve currency of the world for this very reason. Because if the national debt, which is up to $17 trillion now, and by the way, I think it was Milton Friedman had a great line, the worst financial oxymoron, or one of them, is temporary government program. There is no such thing as a temporary government. Anything that started out temporary is permanent. I think the Tennessee Valley Authority is still there for electrification of the Tennessee Valley, in the 1930s. The issue is once they start a program, it never stops. It's permanent, and then you have a permanent constituency. And I remember, and you've talked with Michael Burgess many times, our congressman who took Dick Armey's place up here in Denton, and he said, Jerry, I would never have believed how hard it is to cut spending until I was actually in Washington.
Yes.
My wife did some work with the National Institutes of Health up there, and she said that when she went to one of our, I'll just say, Texas senator to complain about this issue, because one of the Texas senators was on the board, the whole conversation with her chief aide starts out, I guess I gave it away then. And the chief aide talked to her, said, we're not going to cut your benefit. We're not going to cut your benefit. She said, wait a minute. What about all this garbage you're spending? Flips open a book that had stuff from the Freedom of Information Act about essentially all the porn studies they were funding, and prostitution. How do they give AIDS to people at truck stops? And all this really deviant stuff that was being funded by my tax dollars and yours. Well, that kind of stuff just won't fly. So the issue here is this: the government spending is not a threat. It's not an existential threat to our system today. But if you let this thing keep going another decade or so, it very well could be, because then you're going to have 76 million boomers all taking Social Security, all taking Medicare at that point, or almost all of them, plus have all the other issues you've got, and you've got a runaway freight train with the national debt. One of our, again, my favorite analyst, bank credit analyst, calls it the long wave, the economic long wave or economic super cycle. And by the way, in the book of Leviticus, God said, here's how you can stop that, by the way. It's called the year of Jubilee. For every 50 years, you reset the clock on the debts. So without getting into that, because we don't have enough time on this program, the bottom line is societies tend to go in too much in debt, too much in debt, too much in debt. It starts out low. People have been purged through, like the Great Depression, for example. They don't want to go into debt. They teach that to their kids. Those kids are usually pretty cautious. They may remember the Depression as children. They're real cautious with debt. I'll borrow a little for a house or car, but pay it off. The next generation see nothing but prosperity. They leverage for everything. In this case, we got 4 generations that just believe prosperity is here to stay. Of course, 2008 gave a little bit of an interruption to that. But the bottom line is they keep pyramiding debts. So right now, the consumers in America have said, that didn't work too well, and they've stopped pyramiding their debts, private sector debt. But government debt is not doing that. So we've had a big improvement in the annual budget deficit since the recovery, quote-unquote, recovery's hit. But if you look at the long-term stats for the government, even the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan organization that does all these studies, they said, well, here's the numbers that the politicians sort of told us to run the budget on. Oh, and by the way, here's an alternate scenario. The alternate scenario is as the baby boomers come into the system, this deficit starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger over the next 15 years or so. And they said, clearly, the alternate scenario is not sustainable.
Right.
Well, what does not sustainable mean? I like words of one of my favorite economists and comedians, Ben Stein's father, said, any trend that is not sustainable has a tendency to stop.
Yes.
And so the issue is, if it's unsustainable, it's going to stop at some point.
You get hit a wall.
Creates big, big issues for the U.S. economy, U.S. government, everything. It's off the table. All of a sudden, you've got really big problems if this thing continues to metastasize. And right now, it looks to me like it's going to and continue to do that.
Just before we let you go, one of the things we always encourage people to do is, first of all, you have your Cornerstone reports. And if people contact you at cornerstonereport.com or click on the website there, or even the article that we have a sample of there in the article section, they can subscribe and get this for free. Some people say, well, I'd like to read your book, and we still have copies of your book, From Boom to Bust and Beyond. It's available at Point of View, so you can get it there, and that one will cost you a little bit, but not much. And I just think these are very small investments of time and money so that people will make wise decisions about their finances. But talk about when they contact you at Cornerstone, maybe you've got some other ways in which you can help people offline.
We help people with portfolio management, investment management. We have set up some strategies which we believe will work in bull or bear markets by God's grace, and the proof is in the pudding. But the bottom line is we're preparing for it as if we're getting ready to have another bear market in the next 12 to 18 months. And we found people that have historically prospered in those kind of environments, although obviously past performance is no guarantee. So if you want a second opinion about how you're handling your investments and your retirement accounts, then our number is 800-327-4285, 1-800-327-4285, and our website is called cornerstonereport.com. That's cornerstonereport.com, and at the very least, sign up for our monthly newsletter that goes out. It's going out to you free of charge. Well,
again, just an important resource for people to make wise decisions about some of their financial decisions, and especially with all of the turmoil right now, it was just important to get you back in here. We see what is happening in Israel. We'll be talking about this week. We've certainly been talking about the crisis at the border right now with the immigration invasion. And then, of course, we look at the continued growth of the government, the impact of adding more people on to the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, certainly the impact of the growing amount of debt. These are all issues that people need to take into account as they make those decisions. So, Jerry, thank you for being with us today.
It's been great again, Kerby. Thanks for having me on.
One more time, let me mention that we have posted an article here. Euphoria Marks the Top. It's just one that came out about a month ago, but now there's a new version of it, which I think you would want to see because now we have some new data. So that is available there, and I would encourage you to go to the website to find that. The web link is Cornerstone Financial, or you simply can go to cornerstonereport.com to find out a little bit more about what Jerry Tuma and his staff are making available. And during this time of so significant social turmoil, it's probably important more than ever to get sound financial advice, especially from a Christian perspective. So we're going to take a break. We come back, we're going to get into how to defend the faith. A new book out, Christianity on Trial, by Mark Lanier. Fascinating book. I think you'll really enjoy our conversation about apologetics. And as we go to a break, let me encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net. There's a place for you to get involved with us. And also, of course, there's a button there that says donate. If you can help us out financially, we would greatly appreciate it. We'll take a break and come back and talk about how to defend the Christian faith right after this.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
thinking about you. Jesus, I love you, how I adore you. I can't stop thinking about you.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
So often here on Point of View, we talk about how to enable you to articulate a biblical point of view and also to know how to defend a biblical worldview. So that's why I'm very excited about this book that we're going to be talking about today, Christianity on Trial. A Lawyer Examines the Christian Faith. It is written by Mark Lanier. He is certainly a very accomplished individual, founded the Lanier Law Firm in 1990. He's a graduate of Texas Tech Law School, and he is perhaps one of the premier trial lawyers in America. The National Law Journal has twice named him as one of the nation's top 10 trial attorneys, as well as the 100 most influential lawyers in America. He has such a heart for apologetics as well as for the legal profession. He is also the founder of the Lanier Theological Library, and we have a link to that on our website. We also have information about his book and a way that you can order it. Christianity on Trial is published by InterVarsity Press. You can look for it in your local bookstore, 230 pages, but we also make it available here for you to order as well. He, in addition to all of those things, also teaches a weekly Sunday school class, 750 plus members at Champion Forest Baptist Church. Mark Lanier, just a delight to have you on the program with us today.
Kerby, how exciting to be on Point of View, one of our nation's bright spots on the radio waves.
Let me, for just a minute, before I get to your book, talk about your library, because I wanted people to know that you're doing a lot more than just the legal profession. You are putting together what eventually be a library, I think I saw, of 120,000 books. You had N.T. Wright speak a while back. If you go to the website, you can hear some of the things he had to say. And as you told him about that when you were over in Great Britain, he didn't have any idea of what he was going to encounter when he came. And so you have been involved for some time with your time and your talent and your treasure to really develop a way in which we can be more effective in defending the Christian faith.
Well, you're very kind, Kerby. We're really excited. The Lord's let us be a part of this library. When we built it, we had no clue what it would become. We've been graced to have N.T. Wright over to speak. We've had Alistair McGrath, D.A. Carson, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia came and spoke. We've had probably at this point around 20 or 30 different speakers, all available to watch for free on the Internet, and you've got the links up on your website that can bring people to our library website. Anybody who's in the Houston area, we urge them to come by. We'll have 16 or 17 at this point graduate schools and seminaries who use our library as their principal place of research, and it's open to the public as well. So we invite everyone to come see the treasures that exist in studying the kingdom.
Well, we're talking about some of those institutions, some very nice things said about you and your book by people like Ken Starr, president of Baylor University, Paige Patterson, of course, the president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and certainly a number of others that have endorsed your book. And it's a wonderful way to begin to get people thinking about the defense of the Christian faith. As a trial lawyer, you have to bring in witnesses. You have to consider all of the evidence, and you, in a sense, bring witnesses to each one of the chapters from history many times, but some are contemporaries, and then, in a sense, use their testimony to make the case for the gospel. Explain, if you might.
Well, Kerby, what I found interesting in my professional life is I go to courtrooms all around this country, and I'm constantly being asked to prove something. And when I was a baby lawyer, it might be something as simple as who ran the red light. Nowadays in my life, after doing this for 30 years, it's a lot more complicated. It might be, did this drug cause this cancer, or did this asbestos cause this lung disorder, or did this company defraud that company? Whatever it may be. I'm asked to prove these things in a court of law, and our courtroom is the culmination of thousands of years of civilization trying to best determine what has happened and what is the truth behind a circumstance, a question, an issue, or a factual matter. Now, because we've got this marvelous institution of court with all of these rules and with all of these safety guarantees, such that we believe our system is adequate to assess guilt, adequate to take life from someone, adequate to take property from someone, I said, why don't we take those same tools and use them to examine the core basics of the Christian faith? And truly ask this question: if I were in a court of law, could I prove what I believe?
Sure. And it's very well done, by the way. And you are well aware of the history of those who were barristers, lawyers, and others that decided to apply some of their legal training to an evaluation of the Scriptures, an evaluation of the claims of Jesus Christ. And so we're going to spend some time working our way through that today. Might also mention, for those of you that are in the legal profession, another thing that Mark Lanier has done, and I oftentimes wonder as I hear all the things he does when he sleeps, but nevertheless, he has also founded the Christian Trial Lawyers Association, so we might talk more about that in just a minute. But in your first chapter, you say that oftentimes you are in a court of law and a black-robed judge declares, Mr. Lanier, you may begin your opening statement. So, Mark, give us your opening statement before I take our first break.
All right. Well, my opening statement would be, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, one of the most important things you can do when you're trying to make a determination of truth is use your common sense. Common sense will get you 90% of the way home. The only thing you need to add to the common sense, other than your open ears and open eyes, is a heart that's willing to accept the truth once the truth is presented. And if you've got those things, then you are set to really fairly examine the evidence for the Christian faith. Now, when we examine evidence in something like this is not like a classroom where we've got a blackboard and we're trying to prove a mathematical equation. That's one kind of proof, but that kind of proof is never going to let us know, did Napoleon die at Waterloo, or did Jesus die and was he resurrected, or did Martin Luther really nail 99 Theses on the Wittenberg door? To know that, we've got to use a different kind of proof. We use in the courtroom what are called scales of justice. Right. And you put the evidence in one side that's for, and the evidence that's against in the other side, and you see where the greater weight of credible evidence leads you. And that's the type of proof that we use to take away someone's life, liberty. That's the kind of proof we use to take away corporate money or property. That's the type of proof we use to decide where children should be living in the case of a divorced home. It is something that is so believed to be truthful, that we will use it for life's greatest decisions. So let's put the evidence in both sides of the scales, and I think when we do, we will see that the Christian faith is what common sense brings us to conclude.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation today with Mark Lanier. The book is entitled Christianity on Trial. A Lawyer Examines the Christian Faith, 230 pages. It is published by InterVarsity Press. You can certainly look for it in your local bookstore, but we think highly of it and have it in our Point of View store. All the information about it and much more is on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
In a recent editorial, Merrill Matthews reminds us that America has now passed the entitlements tipping point. As you might have guessed, Obamacare is what has pushed the United States over the tipping point. Nearly 7 million Americans who have signed up for Obamacare receive taxpayer-provided subsidies, and another 3 million have signed up for Medicaid. This brings the total to 161 million Americans who now are getting government subsidies of some kind. In the past, there have been politicians complaining that we have too many people in the wagon and too few people pulling the wagon. You even had a presidential candidate lament that too many Americans are takers. Let's reject some of these stereotypes. Many of the people receiving government aid deserve it. For example, 42 million seniors are receiving Social Security and Medicare. Merrill Matthews says they aren't getting something for free. They faithfully paid into the system for decades with the expectation that they would be getting it back at retirement. Of course, we can add to this those who receive benefits because of their service in the military or other parts of the government. My point in raising this issue is not to begrudge those who deserve to receive benefits, but to look at the larger issue. More than half of households receive benefits from the government. When a majority receive benefits from government, it will be even harder, perhaps impossible, to reduce spending and balance the budget. Benjamin Franklin warned, when the people find that they can vote themselves money, that will herald the end of the republic. Let's hope not. Certainly some people can look past their needs to the needs of the country. I've had people call into my radio program who receive Social Security or other government payments who have said they'd be willing to sacrifice something if they could help future Americans. But I suspect they are few in number. It will be even harder to control government spending when a majority of Americans depend on government spending. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Mark Lanier with us as we talk about his book, Christianity on Trial. Court is in session. We're going to focus some time and attention on some of these important proofs of a biblical perspective of the world. And certainly one of the first ones, Mark, is the question of, is there a God at all? And that is an important question. And you have on your witness list King John, for example, the individual that signed the Magna Carta, G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, and others. So how do we, as we look at the evidence, begin to see evidence for the existence of God?
Well, there are different ways we can look at the existence of God and different ways we can look at the evidence to try and make this determination. I suggest that most everybody needs to first understand that God's existence will never be proven by a chemical formula.
Right.
We can't sit there and say with mathematical certainty that there is a God. any more than with mathematical certainty I can prove to someone that I love my wife. Now, I love my wife. There's not a doubt in my mind. There shouldn't be a doubt in anybody's mind who knows me or knows my wife. It's just not something that's suitable to mathematical proof. And so one of the reasons, for example, I call King John as a witness is when King John was approached with the Magna Carta, one of the core reasons that King John was violating the rights of people is that King John had stripped the public of the right to a trial by jury. And we understand that a trial by jury says, let's let everybody look at the evidence themselves, but when they do it, they need to do it by a proper measuring stick. Here's an example I like to use. If I want to know what the temperature is today, if I'm in Houston, Texas, the temperature is about 95 degrees Fahrenheit right now. If I'm in Anchorage, Alaska, the temperature right now is about 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Those are valid measurements, and I'm using a valid measuring rod by using Fahrenheit degrees to give it. Now, if I want to know how far it is from my house to my office, I cannot measure that in Fahrenheit. I can't say the distance between my house and my office is 75 degrees or 80 degrees or 90 degrees or anything like that. I have to use a different measuring stick. I need to use miles or yards or feet or inches or something, but I've got to use a distance measuring stick. Now, here's where this comes in with God. If we want to prove there's a God, or if we want to prove that we love our spouses, then what we want to do is make sure we're not trying to use the wrong measuring stick. The measuring stick is not mathematical certainty. Don't think that way. Think in terms of what is my experience and what is the common sense of life assessing of the evidence that's out there. Now we start looking at the evidence. The evidence can be evidence of creation. It can be evidence of the world. We can put that into the scales, and people will say, oh, but you've got evolution on the other side. Well, no, you can ferret through evolution, and somewhere there came to be matter. Where did matter get created? Ultimately, someone's got to come up with some explanation for why there is anything at all that exists. And is it something that just spontaneously came into the vast nothingness of nothing, or is there some type of a creator? So you can do that type of an approach and put that evidence into the scales, but the evidence that I think is most effective is the evidence that each of us have internally. Somewhere within each of us, there is a recognition that there is a value to human life, that there's a dignity to human life, that there's some meaning and purpose to life, or at least we want there to be. We believe that there's such a thing as beauty. None of us believes that everything is meaningless. Surely there's something worth meaning. All of these different types of ideas I explore within the book with the idea that these become evidences, these become glimpses, that there is something more than the material world, that there's something more than time and chance have created, that there is actually something beyond us that stirs up within us nobility, that stirs up within us love, that stirs up within us an appreciation of beauty, that stirs up within us an abhorrence of evil and a repulsion at things that are wrong. All of those are things that we take, and when we put them into the scales and we consider them carefully, we see that the world around us makes most sense if we understand there is a God behind the world around us.
Mark Lanier with us as we talk about his book, Christianity on Trial. And before we get into who God is from a biblical source, you do have a short chapter on who God is not. And you kind of make the case that sometimes we need to erase our whiteboards a little bit so that we don't add to our false understanding of who God is when we understand what the biblical ideas are. So can you take us briefly through that concept? Because it is important that sometimes people have a wrong view of God, and that affects later on how they view God or whether they even believe God exists.
Kerby, this is one of the things I've always liked about your program. You're always really good at giving a fair assessment of who God is, and the way your point of view is always one that's directing us towards Him in a biblical sense. The problem we have is many of us grow up with a distorted view of God. Many of us grow up and think that God is some traffic cop, that God is just waiting for someone to make a mistake so that He can pull them over and write them up. Some of us think that God is some old man who rocks in a rocking chair up above and looks down with a crooked finger over his beard and points to somebody down below and says, "You're not allowed to do that. That would be just a little too much fun." Some people think of God as the Force from Star Wars, who's this material, impersonal force that has the side of right and has the side of wrong, and it's a life force that we should be trying to tap into. Some people think of God like the life of Pi, that God is just many different roads that lead to some nirvana, some idea that we've found, that experience that validates who we are. Some believe that God is some people recognize God as a father, but some people grow up with fathers that are abusive and fathers that are unloving and fathers that are evil and wicked. And so they carry over those ideas into God, that God's some parent who can never be pleased. Some people think of God as just some puppet master who's going to pull all of the strings and never let you be an individual and never let you be a human. And some see God as an impersonal computer who's simply running a computer program of which we seem to exist in the middle, and God never seems to have anything particular or personal to be involved in our lives. All of these different ideas are ones that I think we need to erase from our board before we consider the biblical picture of God, so that we can give a biblical God a fair hearing.
And again, we've kind of cleared the whiteboard a little bit, but again, you can read that chapter if there are some misconceptions you might have about God. And we're going to focus now, if we can, Mark, on who God is. And the witnesses you bring are varied. It's certainly the psalmist, and it's the heavens, it's St. Paul, as well as scientists like Albert Einstein and Sir John Polkinghorne, because in a sense we can learn a lot more about the majesty of God, the omniscience of God, the omnipotence of God, the omnipresence of God, as we begin to look not only in God's revelation in His Word, but also God's revelation in His world.
Oh, that's exactly right. You know, when I was a young boy, I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, and if you had asked me to draw a picture of the world from where I lived on 16th Street in Lubbock, Texas, I would have drawn a picture that included the local university, it would have included my school, it would have included my church. But somewhere off in the distance, I probably would have drawn a little dot for Washington, D.C., because I knew it was out there somewhere, and I knew, England was out there somewhere. But the really big items that meant a lot to me would have been those items of those things nearest to me, those things I related to. As I got older and I grew, my map of the world expanded. The experiences in my mind expanded. And as those things expanded, my views about the world expanded as well. And I looked back at my childhood and I thought, wasn't I a young, rather naive man? I thought that was the world, and I didn't know how big the world is. Now, I tell that story because that's the way our brains work as we grow. And the problem that many of us have is we perceive God when we're young, especially if we grow up in the faith. We perceive God with the Sunday school stories that we've learned. We perceive God with the prayers over our meals and the prayers before we go to sleep. And then as we get older, many children experience much more of the world, and they don't continue to grow with God when they do. And so they look back at God in this romantic notion and think of God as that part of their life when they were young, naive, and did not know better. And that's a real problem with us, because God is so much bigger than any child's going to understand, than a teenager, than you or I are going to understand.
We need to take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Mark Lanier. Christianity on Trial, a lawyer examines the Christian faith. We'll be back with him right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Spending some time today talking about how to defend the Christian faith. Mark Lanier with us as we talk about his book, Christianity on Trial, A Lawyer Examines the Christian Faith. We have information about it on our website, a way in which you can order it as well. It's in the articles section. Might also mention that in addition to the web link to the Lanier Theological Library and some of the things that Mark Lanier does, we also have posted today his video. It's about 3 minutes long, and I would encourage you to watch it. You'll get a chance to hear from him directly, see some of the things that he's been involved with. And then I would encourage you at the end, perhaps, to take the time to hit the share button. That way you could put it on your Facebook page or maybe on your blog, or send it to somebody to let them know about this particular book, Christianity on Trial, and to learn more about Mark Lanier. You know, Mark, you were talking just a minute ago about the fact that sometimes we have a view of God that was developed when we were a child. And one of the very effective evangelistic techniques I've talked about on this program before is sometimes when an individual will say, well, I don't believe in God, my natural reaction is to say, well, tell me who you think God is. Tell me who you believe God is. Tell me what you think his attributes are. And oftentimes at the end, that's very easy for me to say, well, I don't believe in that God either. You have a false view, an incorrect view of who God is, or the God of the Bible. And there is a sense in which that's what you're talking about there in terms of your chapter. You even have a sample diagram of what it would have been like for you to draw a map of the world living in Lubbock, Texas. But obviously your life is expanded, your brain is expanded, and in a sense we should allow our view of God to expand as well.
Yes, you know, if you consider how many countless stars, one with 23 zeros after its stars in the universe, and God, the God of the Bible, says he not only knows every star, but knows every atom in every star, with every electron going around every atom and where it is at any moment in time. When we start contemplating a God that massive and a God that's so far beyond anything any of us are going to ever conceive of in our brain, we're in a bit of a quandary. One option is just to say, well, there can't be a God like that because I could not conceive of such a God being so incredibly, awesomely big, large, huge. So what do? We either reduce God down into something that fits into our brain, or we run from the idea that there's a God because God doesn't fit into our brain, or we fall down and say, oh my goodness, if there's a God like this, then this is a God I want to at least understand as best as I can, and I would love to be in a relationship with. And so those are the choices we've got. And I think what a lot of people do is they just run from the choice because we're much more comfortable with our brains than we are with the idea that there really is something beyond us that puts us into our place of who we are. I'd call it an Isaiah 6 experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also one of the things you spend a little bit of time talking about is the science issue, because you have in both of your chapters there some witness lists that include people like Sir John Polkinghorne, and you have a comment or two about science and faith, because sometimes I would think, Mark, individuals with a scientific background would think, well, either I accept science or I accept the Bible. I can't really put the two together, and yet you feel that there is no contradiction between science and faith.
You know, if I had someone come up to me today and they said to me, Mark, how did you have your, did you have some tea? I had a hot tea this morning. How did you get your tea? I could say, well, I got there was a heating element that excited the electron molecules inside the water such that they, in an excited state, took on a higher temperature. And when that water with a higher temperature was poured over the mint tea bag, it leached out chemicals and oils from the mint that flavored the water in such a way that I was able to enjoy a cup of hot tea. Now, that would be a true answer of how I got my hot tea this morning. But there's another answer of how I got my hot tea this morning, and that is my wife loves me to death and knew I wanted some, so she made me some. Now, both of those are true.
Yes.
And you could sit there and say, well, wait, it's one or the other. No. Both of those are true. Now, you can look at the world in great scientific detail, and you can understand with scientific precision some marvelous ways that things happen and occur. But you can also say in faith that there's a God who put this world together with these laws of nature and with these principles. In fact, Paul says in Romans that the way the world is put together, it reflects the invisible qualities and nature of God, consistency, reliability. All of those things are inherent characteristics of God. And so we can look at the world from a scientific perspective, but it doesn't invalidate the loving God who's put this world in this position, who's put this world where it is today, who takes care of each one of us and longs for relationship with us. So faith and science are, in a sense, two sides to the same coin. They're not mutually exclusive. They embrace each other in beautiful harmony.
One other issue that you certainly raise, and it's an important one, and that is reality and the God of truth. You know as well as I do that we live, Mark, in a world of kind of this postmodern philosophy, this idea that we really don't have a belief in absolute truth. And so, again, you quote and call as witnesses everybody from Plato to Descartes, all the way up to, of course, St. Paul and St. John and Augustine and Anselm of Canterbury, because this issue of truth is crucial to this presentation of a biblical idea and certainly a biblical defense of the idea of God and of Jesus Christ and of the Bible.
One of my favorite witnesses I call in that section is a gentleman who teaches at Oxford University. Now, my son teaches logic and philosophy at Oxford. And so through my son Will, I've gotten to know and become acquainted with a number of the different people over there. There's a gentleman named Nick Bostrom, and Time Magazine and numbers of other resources list him as one of the top 100 thinkers in the world. Nick Bostrom teaches that there is a statistically significant chance that all of us don't really exist, that sometime in the future, humanity creates a computer that's able to make within its own program artificial life, so that the computer can run projected scenarios about what would happen if this happens, what would happen if that happens. And in the event a computer is ever invented like that, then the artificial life within the computer's programs would be people like you and me. And so Nick Bostrom says what we're living may not be reality at all. We may actually be part of a massive computer program in this sense. And I use that to say, how many of us actually sit down and say, okay, is there a reasonable basis for believing that I really exist as a person, that reality really is what I perceive it to be? That there really is something outside of me, that this is not a dream I'm living, that I'm not part of the matrix, that I'm not part of some computer program, but that I really exist. There really is a sun that is out there shining down upon me, that the wind is legitimate, that my friends and my family are who they are, etc. So we really explore, how do we know reality in that chapter?
Well, and again, it's an important question because it's like the Truman Show, the Matrix, the butterfly dream, or whatever. And again, there are people that will hold to that, but it's an important aspect of truth that needs to be addressed. And so when we come back from the break, I wanted to spend some time looking at the few other issues that you have addressed here, right and wrong and the moral God. Certainly some of the other aspects of our free will and moral responsibility. Just a very quick look, obviously, at a book that is 230 pages entitled Christianity on Trial. It is written by Mark Lanier, and if you'd like to know more about him, we have information about this on our website. And Mark, just before we take a break, I might just mention that we do have a link to the Lanier Theological Library, and so I thought people might be interested in finding out the fact that there is a place where some individuals could do research, where you have lectures, and where you are really working to try to advance the defense of the gospel.
And we thank you for having that list on your website, Kerby. It's an exciting place. You just walk around and you'll see people and you'll be stunned and say, wait a minute, you're writing a book on this or that, or I read your book on that. We've got some marvelous people who are in here on a daily basis.
Well, again, some great resources that we have linked to on our website today. So take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. That will take you to all the things we're talking about today with Mark Lanier. We have his book available in our Point of View library. It's a book that I think you would really want to have, so we certainly make it available there. But if you can get it in your local bookstore, feel free to do so. We just certainly wanted to make it possible for you to get a copy of it, and it is available on our website. We have articles about the book. We have web links, and most importantly, don't forget that video. It's about 3 minutes long. You can learn a little bit more about this book. You can see Mark Lanier, and most importantly, I hope you'll take the time to hit that share button and share it with other individuals that need to know about these resources. Let's take a break. We'll continue with Mark Lanier right after this.
Without reason, you took the blame. You were rejected time and again. You loved your accusers the same as a friend. I wanna love without love, I am nothing, and I wanna love the way you love, 'cause without love, I am nothing. You were beaten,
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we continue our conversation with Mark Lanier. Christianity on Trial, a lawyer examines the Christian faith. And you have a chapter about right, wrong, and the moral God, just as the chapter on truth really addresses this issue of postmodernism and all sorts of ideas that, well, you have different views of truth, so there's no belief in absolute truth. This chapter really addresses the issue of moral relativism, the idea that, well, you have your view of ethics, I have a different view of ethics, someone else has a third view of ethics, and you really raise a very important question that you answer by the end of the chapter, and that is, can we say what Adolf Hitler did was wrong? Can we actually say that some things are evil? And you, again, believe that's a very important principle that needs to be applied as we defend the Christian faith.
Yes, Kerby, this chapter grew out of me asking myself a question. Here was the question. If I, as a lawyer, had been called to defend Adolf Hitler, could I have done it? Not could I have brought myself to do it, but could I have successfully defended Adolf Hitler and walked him in a court of law? And the conclusion I drew as I experimented with that with myself was, you give me the right jury of moral relativists, and I could walk Adolf Hitler. Because while every person I've ever met will be quick to tell you what Hitler did was evil, it was abhorrent, it was wrong, there's no question, there's no debate, there's no dispute. Everyone will say you don't kill millions and millions of Jews and disenfranchised people. It's wrong, okay? Everybody will say that. If you probe it and you say, now why is it wrong? Because you've got Hitler. First of all, he didn't break any laws. Hitler was duly elected by a majority vote. Hitler, once elected, had laws properly passed that enabled him to set up the concentration camps, that enabled him to do everything that was done. It was done legally, so he didn't break a law. Then you say, well, he didn't break a German law, but he broke the law of sensibility of humanity. Well, who wrote the law of sensibility of humanity?
Yeah.
You know, and I'll go a step further and I'll say this. If you look at what Hitler was working with, now here he is, he's post-Darwin. Darwin says we as a species evolved from lesser forms. Darwin is taken further by Herbert Spencer, who says that those most suited to the environment survive. It's called survival of the fittest. Then you took it into a further realm with Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, now, what we are today is not the end of evolution. What we are today is just one step along the road. In the future, we'll be a superhuman, an Ubermensch. We will be so far progressed from what humans are today that people looking at us today will consider us mere monkeys. So Hitler, who was a big fan of Nietzsche, I put a picture in there of Hitler visiting the Nietzsche archives.
Right.
Hitler comes in and he says, okay, I believe this stuff. Now, if I believe this stuff, then what am I going to do as a responsible leader? I'm going to help us become that greater evolved species. I'm going to help move us along. I don't want us to stay stagnant as the apes are. I want us to become greater beings. So we will purge the gene pool of those characteristics and traits and genetic attributes that we think are holding us back so that we can be more pure, better people, we can progress, we can get over society's ills, we can become what we are destined to become faster. Hitler should be a hero, would be the argument to a moral relativist that could be made. Now, of course, as a Christian, I sit here and say, wrong. Human beings are made in the image of God. They have value. They have dignity. They have worth because they were created by God in His image. It is that recognition that humans have this dignity and value that causes everyone to cry out and say what Hitler did was wrong. It is because we do recognize that we have inherent value. But we only have that if we've got something outside of us saying we have that value.
Very well said.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the genesis of that chapter.
Just before we go, I did want to at least get to the chapter on the resurrection. If for no other reason, then there have been other lawyers, and I'm thinking of Frank Morrison, for example, who was a lawyer, wrote the book Who Moved the Stone. And there have been a number of lawyers, but you're one more, that believe that we can really establish the truth of the resurrection, once again, based upon kind of legal evidence. And, of course, you call as your witnesses of the writers of the Gospels and individuals that saw the risen Christ. But briefly, how once can we make the case for this idea of the resurrection of Jesus Christ?
Well, it's really interesting. If you try to sift through everything and you put it into the scales, as I told your listeners earlier, put in the scales everything in favor of a resurrection on one side and everything against the resurrection on the other side. All of the evidence for the resurrection. You've got eyewitnesses, you've got secondhand accounts, you've got people who gave their life because they believed it and they saw it and they experienced it. You've got hundreds of people historically that have been written up as in that category. Now, you got that on one side of the scales. On the other side of the scales, what do you have? The only thing against a resurrection on the other side of the scales is basically one thing, and that is it just doesn't happen. Human beings don't come back from 3 days dead.
Right.
That's the only thing you've got on the other side of the scales. The problem is that's not really in the other side of the scales if Jesus is not a human being. If there is a God, if Jesus is God incarnate, this idea that human beings don't come back from the dead after 3 days, all that does is validate the divinity of Jesus that he did.
Yes.
And so you don't really have anything on the other side of the scales once you're willing to see that there is a God. And there's a reason I put that chapter toward the end of the book. You've got to first see that there's a God. But if it's reasonable to see that there's a God, that he loves humans, that he cares about humans, that he reveals himself to humans, if those other things are true, the resurrection's almost a gimme. That's what all the evidence indicates.
It's like a footnote, because if you believe in the miracle of creation, certainly the miracle of a resurrection is a little bit smaller miracle. It's one we can't do, but certainly it illustrates that, again, once you've made the case for truth, once you've made the case for the Gospels, once you've made the case for the existence of God, the rest of it falls together pretty simply, and that's why it's a fairly small chapter, but still a very important one, and an illustration, again, of the truthfulness of the Gospels, and a very effective way in which you have defended the Scriptures. So I appreciate, Mark, the work that you've done in this book. Just before we let you go, talk about how people can use this book. I know you teach a Sunday school class, and it would be encouraging, I think, to some of our listeners to take some of these ideas that are in your book and teach them in their own Bible fellowship or Sunday school class, don't you think?
Kerby, that's a wonderful idea. We found out from a number of different churches that they're doing that. I think anybody you know that's headed off to college ought to read this book before they go out into the world and expand their brains, without remembering they need to take God and expand God's vision in their brain when they learn all these other things. I think people who have friends who aren't willing to consider the message of Christ and truth, this may not answer all of their questions, but it's a marvelous place to begin a discussion with them. I've got a number of Jewish friends that are reading the book and saying with me, hey, when we're done, we want to discuss this with you. It's a marvelous discussion starting piece as well. So my hope is that God can use this in his kingdom, and that his followers will be themselves strengthened by it, but that it'll also be used as a tool to help other people learn the truth about who God is and what he's done for us.
The book is entitled Christianity on Trial, A Lawyer Examines the Christian Faith. It's written by Mark Lanier. He's been our guest this hour, and it's just been a delight to have you on the program. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely, Kerby. God bless you.
Mark Lanier, and again, if you'd like to know more about him, we, of course, have his bio, and you can click on today on Point of View. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about him or the book, we have a video that you can watch, and encourage you to click on the share button. We also have an article there and also some web links that will put you in touch with him. And most importantly, we think so highly of the book, we've put it in our Point of View store so you could order it today and get that immediately, or, of course, you can look for it in your local bookstore. Hope you appreciated the conversation. So often we talk about the importance of apologetics, knowing how to defend the Christian faith. We really want to equip you and empower you so that you are able to articulate a biblical worldview, and so you know how to defend a biblical worldview. This particular book will help you to do the latter, and I hope that you'll take the time to find out more about that. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. See you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.